Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you and welcome to the second day of CPAC. What an honor it is to be here. And I want to begin today doing something that you probably didn't think was going to happen at CPAC. I want to say a great big thank you to President Obama. And I know that may seem so totally out of place at CPAC, but you see, I want to say thank you, President Obama, because you have done more than any person in the entire GOP field, any candidate has done, to bring this party to unity and energize this party as a result of your attack on religious liberty and the attack on the personhood of every human being in America. Thank you, President Obama, for doing what none of us Republicans could apparently get done. Single-handedly, the President's attempt to trample over the Constitution and the fact that there is a very explicit kind of wording there that he apparently did not get in ninth grade civics that the rest of us must have heard. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And Obamacare precisely did that, and it's time that we tell him and Congress, no thank you, we will elect a new president, a new Congress, repeal Obamacare, and stand up for life and for liberty for every single American. The First Amendment is pretty clear in that it tells us that Congress can't do anything, shouldn't do anything, won't do anything that either prefers or prohibits people's freedom to exercise their own faith. And the fact that Catholic hospitals, and not just Catholic hospitals, but any hospital, any organization, would be required to provide not just contraceptive services, but Plan B abortion pills and other services that are outside the conscience of people of faith is in fact a direct violation of the First Amendment. And I heard yesterday that EWTN is filing a lawsuit, or has filed a lawsuit. For that, I am grateful. I remember very vividly when John F. Kennedy said that we are all Berliners. Well, in many ways, thanks to President Obama, we are all Catholics now. We are all standing together. You know, growing up a Baptist in the South, I never thought I'd see the day when I would stand in front of several thousand people and say, we're all Catholic. Praise the Lord. Pass the offering plate. It's time to get serious. By the way, if CPAC is giving out any awards this week, I would suggest they give a great big Person of the Year award to Kathleen Sebelius. She has truly, in her absolutely adamant point of view, given us a reason to rally. And I think it is important that we thank those who help bring our party together, bring the conservative cause together, and make it so that we will go toward a victory not only in the White House and in the Congress, but 60 votes in the U.S. Senate and get a strong majority across Washington. There's one other thing for which I want to say thanks to President Obama, and that is that, quite frankly, a lot of people thought that this election would center solely on the economy. And in fact, there are many people who said, we don't want to hear about some of these, as they're often called, social issues. Let me be very blunt with you, and whether or not this is a popular statement at CPAC, I really don't care. I'm going to say it anyway. I'm not running for anything. I can say any darn thing I want. It's a real refreshing position to be in. One of the things that the actions of the President and the Secretary this week have shown us is that morality matters even more than money does, because where there is a nation who has lost its morals, that is a nation who will freely give up its money. Because if we give up the basic right to life, we will certainly give up those things which are in our pockets. Let us never act as if somehow that the simple idea of how much money we get to keep is more important than whether or not we keep our very lives and our liberties under the Constitution of the United States. Lose those, and money won't matter. Folks, that's what's happened this week to remind us of that great tie-in between the two. Just as the Constitution expressly prohibited Congress from ever making a law that would prefer or prohibit the free exercise of anybody's faith, the Declaration of Independence was absolutely crystal clear when it gave us the foundation of our liberty and freedom. And in 1776, when these words were penned and signed bravely by the signers of the Declaration, they were radical words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, sometimes in the course of 240 years, we tend to forget what those words really mean. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Nobody has to explain them to us. Nobody has to amplify them for us because they're so obvious, so absolutely on their face clear, that we recognize the truth of them even without the expression of them. That all men are created equal. In 1776, that was radical. Because up until that time, people were not considered equal. They were more equal or less equal by the way of how much property they owned or what their last name was, what ethnicity they had, where they lived, what occupation they held. And some people were considered more valuable than others for the external and temporal things that were merely human manifestations. Our founders, though most of them had come from a sense of nobility and certainly would have justified perpetuating their own position in society as being more valued than the people who served them, rejected that view philosophically and said, all of us are created equal. And then endowed, not by our government, endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. Unalienable meaning they cannot be taken from us by a government because a government didn't give them to us in the first place. A Creator gave us the rights, and government's only job is to secure and protect the rights that were given by God. And if we ever believe that government is our God, then we certainly can believe that government is free to come and take the rights we have. And that's why the idea that we can separate faith from freedom is a ridiculously naive idea. We cannot, we will not, we must not ever separate the idea that we are a nation under God. The idea of our equality of life really is the essence of who we are as Americans. Even though it took us a long time to really get to the place where we applied it appropriately, women did not get to vote for 150 years. African Americans were not given their full rights and freedom until the 1970s, which is a hard part of our history. Nevertheless, the framework was in fact there all along. And it was the idea that no person is worth more than another and no person is worth less than another. I've made it very clear throughout my political life that I am not pro-life because of politics. I am political because I'm pro-life. And I do not want for 1 minute this country to ever fall back against the position that it was founded upon, and that is that every human life, from the moment of its conception, from the moment at which it became a creation of God, when 23 chromosomes from a male and 23 from a female joined together in the unique creation of a DNA schedule that had never existed before, will never exist again quite like that. Not a mere appendage of the mother, because if it were, it would share all of the DNA characteristics, including the blood type, which it most certainly does not. Biologically, scientifically, irrefutably, that is a life from the moment it is conceived. It is a unique life, and it is a human life. And the reason that it is a unique and human life and cannot be anything else is because the irrefutable science is that this life that becomes that DNA schedule at the moment of conception can never become a puppy or a dolphin or a stalk of broccoli. It only has the capacity to be fully developed into the human beings that we are today. It is a human being because that's what it started out to be in its cellular dimensions, and that's what it remains. People say, but it's not looking like a human at that point. Look, take a little baby and an old man. They don't look the same either, but they're still both human, my friend. Now, having said that, that may not be entirely true. Come to think of it, a lot of old men look a lot like a little baby. And they all drool all over themselves. So I guess there maybe is some truth to that. The value of our lives is not in what we do. It's who we are. The value of our life is not in what we own. It is who has created us. And I understand that the economy is going to be a centerpiece of this election cycle, and that's fine. It should be. But I also want to make it very clear that I will never vote for someone who does not respect the sanctity of a human life, because I believe that if a person does not respect your life, or yours, or yours, or yours, they ultimately will not respect the liberty and the sense of equality that should be extended to every single American living under our constitutional form of government. I want to invite you all, as you have been invited, to the screening of the Gift of Life movie. I think it is a very powerful tool to share with your friends and your family and even the skeptics that you know at your workplace or maybe within your social circles. It is unlike any pro-life film that I've ever personally seen or been a part of. And it is not so much about the what of the issue of life, but rather the why. And the stories are compelling and powerful, and I hope at 10 o'clock this morning you'll have a chance to go to the Thurgood Marshall Theater, the CPAC Theater, and see the screening. It will be, I promise, one of the most riveting hours that you will spend at CPAC. Let me also encourage you to read a book by Andy Andrews. It's called How Do You Kill 11 Million People? It's a wonderful, tiny little book, takes 15 minutes to read. I wish I'd written it. I really do. Andy's going to sell a lot of these. But he should. It is a powerful story and simple. How do you kill 11 million people? You know how you do it? You lie to them. You lie to them. I hope you'll understand that the reason that so many things happen in this country that we stand back and we say, how could this be? If we are willing to believe lies that are told to us by people who want to be our leaders, then it's not hard to ultimately come to the place where people will march to their own destruction. Let us not be an American people who march to the destruction of our own freedoms and liberty because we believe the lies that we are told. And instead, we research the truth, we discover the truth, and we absolutely demand the truth from those who want to serve us. You see, I believe life is an important part of the economy. Since 1973, we have seen the termination of some 50 million fellow Americans who never saw their first light of day, never took their first breath. 50 million that we know of. And when I hear people talk about we have to import labor into our country because we don't have the labor force necessary, I'm thinking, wait a minute, you know, we had 50 million people who would have been a part of our labor force that we terminated, that we killed. What happened to them? Who would they have been? What would they have done? When we devalue a life that is unborn, we ultimately will devalue a life that is born. And let me explain how that happens economically. One of the reasons that we see such anger and hostility in the American people is because many workers in their workplaces are treated as expendables, disposable. It used to be you go to work for a company, there was a sense that if you were loyal to the company would be loyal to you. If you had a pension, it would be protected. If you had a pay plan, it would be protected. Sure, there were instances where companies could not continue and they went out of business even through the best efforts to keep them alive. But generally speaking, Americans could go to work in their 20s for a company and retire from that company in their 60s, and that there would be a loyal partnership between the workers and the company that was good for the development and the building of the middle class of America. Why do you think we have come to the place where even though some people are challenged because they're not loyal enough to their company, what happened to the idea that their companies would be loyal to them as well? What happened to the idea that in this country that there would be a sense of partnership in the workplace, not an attitude that every worker is expendable and disposable? Why did that happen? If we believe that life is expendable and disposable when it's not born, why would we doubt that eventually we would come to the place to believe that American lives are expendable after they are born? Folks, the economy of this country is tied in many ways to the psyche of belief that people as individuals do not matter. They matter only as a mass. I believe every individual has equality. No government cannot protect and prove and promise a job or a paycheck or a pension. That is not the government's job. I don't want the government ever passing a law telling a company what it ought to do, what it has to do. But I want companies to act with a sense of responsibility and morality to do what they ought to do because it's good business and it's good, decent human behavior. That's not a government's job. It's the moral responsibility of those who run the businesses. And what's really tragic is that we've created a society where we value some more than we value the others, and we've made government the referee of it. We've allowed government to decide which businesses will live and which will fail. Government steps in and decides big banks and big insurance companies and big brokerage houses will live because we will bail out their recklessly run, irresponsibly managed sense of business. But those small businesses on Main Street and the homeowners are left to simply fail and fall because they're not considered equal. When you have the mindset from the government that someone is too big to fail, you have also the same mindset that others are too small to matter. What happened to the idea that all of us are created equal, big and small, black and white, rich and poor, strong and weak? The essence of America is that we do not have a government that decides who's strong and who's weak, who lives and who dies. We have an America that simply referees the game to give us the opportunity to play it with fairness. And when the guys in the striped jerseys began to put on a team shirt and decide who's going to end up winning the game, government has usurped its responsible authority and duty and has become something that our constitutional founders never intended for it to do. I was one of the few people 4 years ago that decried the idea that we were going to bail out companies through TARP. I understand that we were told with hand-wringing by Republicans that if we didn't do that, the economy would really, really get in trouble. So we did it. And the economy got really, really in trouble anyway. And then we set up and teed up the ball for Obama and the Democrats to now create a bailout mindset and mentality. And we can blame the Democrats, but the Republicans were the ones who first put that ball in play. And we ought to apologize to America for ever having created the idea that that is a government responsibility to bail out big companies who weren't managed well. I said then, and I want to say now, it never was appropriately named TARP. It should have been named the Congressional Relief Access Program. I'll let you figure it out from there, because that's what it was. And last week when the President, in a State of the Union, suggested that we needed something really, really significant like the Hoover Dam, I jumped up from my chair. I wanted to scream at the television, hoping that he could hear me as clearly as he heard Joe Wilson a year ago. I wanted him to hear me when I said, Mr. President, how would we ever build a Hoover Dam in the environment in which your EPA would be more concerned about protecting a lizard than a human life? Please help me understand that. And then last week, at the National Prayer Breakfast, the President stood and gave the country a homily. I was amazed. I did not realize that we had elected a theologian to be Commander-in-Chief. He actually believes and said that Jesus would want us to pay higher tax rates. Look, unlike the president, I actually do have a degree in religion. And I don't recall ever having read in the New Testament that Jesus was that specific about tax policy. He did say this: if you owe taxes, pay them. Hello, Timothy Geithner. Did you get that part of the New Testament? In fact, Jesus so believed that we were supposed to pay the taxes that we actually owed, that in order to pay his taxes, he took a coin from the mouth of a fish to pay his taxes. If Obama has his way, we all are going to have to do a lot of fishing, and we better hope those fish are eating a bunch of coins, because it's going to take a bunch of them to take care of the bills. But here's my point to the president. All respect due. He reported giving 1% of his income away in charity. And he wants to lecture me about being responsible as a steward of my resources. Mr. President, last time I checked, the bare minimum for a believer is a dime out of a dollar that is supposed to go to take care of the widows, the poor, the orphans. It is the job not of the government, but of Christian believers to stand up and reach out to the people who are in need. We will never do that on a penny out of a dollar, and when we give that sparingly, it will necessitate the government giving more glowingly. I'd rather give that money out of my own pocket than have anyone in Congress reach into my pocket and take more from me than even God is asking. That is absurd. And let me say this. In the Old Testament, the Bible says, will a man rob God if he does not pay his tithes? May I suggest that I don't care whether it's a Democrat or Republican, you look at their contribution record. Look at how they personally believe that they have responsibility to their fellow man. And if their giving is as poor or worse than the president's, then here's what you better realize. If a person will rob God, that person will steal you blind. Don't you ever forget it. Let me just conclude by saying that there's a lot of talk about which of the Republican candidates are the real conservatives. I understand all that talk, but quite frankly, one of the reasons I'm not endorsing anyone in the primary is because all of them are more conservative than the opponent that they will have in November. And personally, I'm not so interested in hearing mirror, mirror on the wall, tell me who's the most conservative of them all, because compared to the current occupant of the White House, any of them are going to be so much more conservative. And I think we need to unite together, not so much for party, but for principle and for liberty. And finally, let me just remind you this. Out there in this country, there's some people who are really hurting. They need a voice, they need a champion. They may think they have one in the White House, but his policies have cost them to the point where when you squeeze the handle on the gas pump, I saw a lady do that, put $5 in the tank. She came, and before I could even really realize what she was doing, she had started and stopped and driven off, and I looked and saw she'd only put $5 in her car. 2 little kids in the back of her car. It occurred to me. She didn't put $5 in her tank because that's all she needed. She put $5 in her tank because that's all she had. And folks, I'm going to tell you, the person who wins the election is the person who can look at that lady at the gas pump putting $5 in the tank and can tell her why the economic policies of limited government and lower taxes will help her fill her tank up better than the idea of a big government that won't let us have a Keystone pipeline and won't let us drill and won't let us get our own resources and hold us hostage to some Middle East tyrant. This is a great country. For God's sake, let's keep it that way. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you today. Thank you.